I'm Freeman Allen, and I'd like to welcome you to another one of our regular dialogues. This evening, I know you've come to hear about the Green New Deal. As the flyer said, it's historical context and local perspectives, and we'll hear more about that later. Dick Haskell is going to MC the program, and right now I'd like to thank particularly Sorrel Stiestra for putting together our program this evening. We have 4 speakers, and I really look forward to what's coming up here. Later on this month, on the 13th, we have another dialogue. It's kind of unusual to have 2 in 1 month, particularly since this other one will not be on a Monday. It'll be on a Wednesday, but it's going to be about a sustainable future for Village South, opportunities and challenges. And I'll just read you a little bit about what it says about the description. It says, please join us for a discussion on imaging a regenerative and sustainable future for Claremont's South Village. You'll hear from the sustainability team from South Village Development that is dedicated to creating a resilient and sustainable neighborhood. Drew Shula and Kanika Sharma of the Vertical Group and Caitlin Morris of Village Partners will present a comprehensive overview of the available opportunities and challenges in the Village South. The discussion will cover existing environmental conditions in Claremont, and there will be opportunity for Claremont community to advocate for comprehensive and inclusive sustainability. And that's going to be on November 13th, so please put it on your calendar if it sounds interesting, and that will be, of course, just a little over a week away. This evening, I would particularly like to also, besides mentioning this dialogue, mentioning another one that's coming up on December 10th, and that's going to be on Safe Clean Water Program, a one-in-a-kind pursuit of regional resilience. And that's going to be presented by Matt Frary, who's acting principal engineer for the Los Angeles County Public Works. And we don't have the details on that one, but put it on your calendar for December 10th. And now I'd like to introduce Dick Haskell, who is the current chair of Sustainable Claremont, and he's going to MC the program this evening. Thank you, Dick.
Thank you, Freeman. I just want to point out that tonight is the 99th dialogue of Sustainable Claremont. And, you think about that for a little while. We've been around for a while. But I think this particular topic, that is the Green New Deal, is so encompassing that it's, in a sense, appropriate that we have a big number in front of us. It probably, I think this dialogue will probably outdo all 98 of its predecessors. We'll see. So we have, as Freeman mentioned, we have 4 speakers tonight, and I'll just introduce them in the order in which they are going to speak. Well, so the format this evening will be, we'll have each speaker, each of the 4 speakers, make a presentation. I think Jason Neidleman, who will be leading off, will probably have a little bit more time to give the full context, the historical context and so forth. But we have 4 different perspectives on the Green New Deal. And it just took us a long time to put this together. We really tried to do this shortly after the February resolution was passed in the U.S. House of Representatives. But it's such an encompassing resolution and affecting just about all aspects of life in the United States that it took us a while to grab what we thought was the right balance of perspectives. And we think we have them tonight. In fact, let me, with my third arm, just do some advancing here. And you can see the 4 speakers we have. And I'll just give a 2-minute, less than 2-minute introduction to each one, and then allow them to come to the podium and give a few remarks, and you'll pretty soon see what each perspective is as they shuffle through. So first of all, Professor Jason Neidleman from University of Verne teaches courses on political theory, public law. Do you want to stand up for a second just so we see who you are? State and local politics and Middle Eastern politics and history. His research focuses on modern political theory in general and on the following topics in particular: the Enlightenment, French political thought and culture, the philosophy of Rousseau, and the relationship between power and ideas. Boy, it's very appropriate for this evening. He is the author of The General Will is Citizenship, Inquiries into French Political Thought, and Rousseau's Ethics of Truth, A Sublime Science of Simple Souls. His current research focuses on the role of myth-making and storytelling in political theory and political life. Welcome, Jason. So Ben, do you want to stand up? Ben Reicher is, may I call you an activist?
Yes.
I mean, you know, I in the most positive sense of that word. Is a sophomore at Pomona College, originally from Agora Hills, California, representing the Claremont College's hub of the Sunrise Movement, where he serves as policy coordinator, responsible for researching and analyzing the policies and candidates our hub, that is their hub, may endorse as part of our environmental advocacy on campus. The Sunrise Movement is a nationwide, youth-led movement that has been a key proponent of the Green New Deal. Welcome. And Daisy Lopez from the Local Workers' Rights Advocacy, actually I should say from the Warehouse Worker Resource Center. Daisy is a community organizer with WWRC, that's Warehouse Worker Resource Center. She is a UCR alum and lifetime Inland Empire, IE is Inland Empire, I'm guessing, resident. Her focus as a community organizer is helping in the planning and facilitation of their monthly health and safety popular ed education program, La Escuelita Viva, right? Good, oh, okay. In addition to covering different topics on how to increase safety in the workplace, they also discuss how to create change in our communities. She is also working with the community from San Bernardino in their fight for a community benefits agreement for the proposed Eastgate Air Cargo Logistics Center at the San Bernardino International Airport. Welcome, Daisy. And lastly, perhaps our cleanup hitter, I suppose, Devon Hartman, which I think we all know, but nevertheless, Devon, I have a very short, and it had to be short, and so we're ignoring his entire professional architectural career in doing so, but that's okay. Devon has been focused full-time on fighting global warming in the building sector, the largest contributor to greenhouse gas proliferation on Earth. He's founded the Community Home Energy Retrofit Program, CHIRP, a nonprofit social enterprise that assists counties and cities in creating a roadmap to citywide net zero energy use. CHIRP educates about the power and benefits of energy efficiency and creates replicable, scalable initiatives that promote massive reduction of greenhouse gases, local economic growth, job creation, and environmental justice. And in a sense, this is the epitome of a Green New Deal example. That's why Devon's here. Currently, in a strategic partnership between the cities of Pomona and Claremont, he is launching CHIRP's capstone project called Locally Grown Power, the first nonprofit solar panel assembly factory in the world, designed to be replicable in cities throughout California and beyond. Welcome, Devon. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Jason, and would you like the handheld?
Sure.
Okay. All right, Jason. This is yours. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you to Sustainable Claremont for inviting me, and thank you also, Sustainable Claremont, for the work that you're doing. I take it my job is to give a kind of overview, give you a sense of the political and historical context, and then to get out of the way and defer to the folks who are doing the real work of decarbonizing our economy. So I will try to do both as well as I can, both give an overview and get out of the way. Okay, the Green New Deal. It is the brainchild of my preferred 2024 presidential candidate, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, maybe 2028 if she's either not old enough or not yet ready to run in 2024, and also of Ed Markey, the co-sponsor in the US Senate. For those of you who haven't read it, it's more of a vision statement than it is a specific or explicit piece of legislation. It sets out a set of principles from which specific pieces of legislation could develop. Trivia question. Does anyone know who coined the term Green New Deal? Well, according to the internet, it's this guy, Thomas Friedman, in the mid-aughts. Yeah. I'm a political theorist. I am currently, as Dick said, working on a model of politics as storytelling. And so I want to share with you why I think the Green New Deal tells a particularly compelling story, why I think it has given so much inspiration to so many people. But let's talk a little bit before we get into that of just the basic provisions of the Green New Deal. So it has two parts, we could broadly say. One is decarbonization of the American economy and American society. And the second is an economic plan to address some of the fallout that will accompany that decarbonization. So the first priority is, and this is a long laundry list, but maybe akin to if you're familiar with the Economic Bill of Rights that FDR proposed in the original New Deal. Jobs, healthcare, housing, education, economic security, clean water, clean air, healthy and affordable food, and access to nature for all Americans. That's almost a comprehensive list, not quite. I left a couple things out. It's even a bit more extensive than that. So that's the first provision. And I think it's interesting that that's emphasized even before we talk about decarbonization. Secondly, 100% clean, renewable, and zero emission energy. Third, repairing and upgrading infrastructure, power grids, and buildings. It's a jobs program, much like the original New Deal. Fourth, overhauling transportation systems in the US, including, we're going to have a formatting issue. That could be a problem later. Zero emission vehicle infrastructure and manufacturing, public transportation, and high-speed rail. And then finally, this is of course my summary. It's about a 16-page resolution. Finally, growth in clean manufacturing and removing pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from manufacturing and agriculture. But as I say, we could divide it into two main components, the first being decarbonization, and the second an economic program to address the consequences of moving away from fossil fuels, which, like any program, will have its winners and losers economically. As I said, I'm a political theorist. I'm thinking now about politics as storytelling, which stories catch on, which are compelling. I have one of the figures I teach every semester, Plato, emphasizing the importance of being able to tell a story. So my model of storytelling, as I've got it built right now, has three components to it. The first component is an answer to the question, who are we? Any compelling political story will have to have an account of who the we is, who the subject of the political story is. Is it we the people? Is it a particular nation? Is it the working class? Is it the middle class? The other two questions are, which I'll get to in a bit, where are we going? And thirdly, what stands in our way? And so as I build this model of storytelling, it seems to me that these three questions have to be answered by any compelling political story, including political philosophy and political ideology. I just was reading Antonio Gramsci, the Italian philosopher, and he says there's two questions to any political story, and one is an account of recognition, and the other is an account of distribution. I think that's pretty good too, but I'm sticking with mine for now. So let's talk about this in the context of the Green New Deal. Who are we in the narrative of the Green New Deal? Well, I would say a few things. We are global citizens. It's important that we identify globally because the problems that we face are global problems. We are imperiled by crisis. That's something that the Green New Deal has in common with FDR's New Deal. Both are responses to crises. We are people who do big things. We are ambitious. That's, again, hearkening back to the New Deal to find inspiration for big projects, a time in history when we were confronted with a massive crisis and we responded proportionately with a massive response. And then finally, people who act together. So I think an important part of the vision of the Green New Deal is that we cannot continue to see ourselves as isolated individuals responsible for our own actions, but without any responsibility to the broader society. So we could say the Green New Deal is the ultimate repudiation of Margaret Thatcher's famous claim that there's no such thing as society. Who is society? Margaret Thatcher asked in 1987. There is no such thing. Exclamation point. There are individual men and women, and there are families. End of quotation. The Green New Deal is an answer to that. It's an insistence that we can do things together, that indeed we must do things together. So that's the first question. The second is, where are we going? And there I think the answer is pretty obvious. It's not to save the planet, that's what I had first, but David Bickford, a colleague of mine who works on global warming, he's a biologist, he actually said the planet's going to survive no matter what we do. And it's not to save the planet. The task is to save the planet's biodiversity, of which we are a part. So that's where we're going. And finally, what stands in our way? The fossil fuel industry. Now, I recently attended a talk by Bill McKibben, and it was interesting to me. He did not mention global warming deniers, climate change deniers. He didn't talk about that. He said, we're not going to waste our time with that anymore. There never was an argument to be made, and to the extent that we spend time trying to refute it, we're just delaying or we're frustrating our own imperative to do something about the problem that confronts us. It's really the fossil fuel industry, he argued. And he argued for a mass mobilization in response to the fossil fuel industry. And there's a lot that's going to be coming out of 350.org in terms of how we might do that. He's targeting the financial sector, the banks that fund the fossil fuel industry. But when I went to that talk, I thought, oh, in a couple weeks, I'm giving a talk on the Green New Deal. This will be great. I'll learn a lot about the Green New Deal. He really didn't want to say much about it. When asked about politics, his response was, no, the task is to build a mass movement. When we build a mass movement and we put enough pressure on the politicians, they will cut a deal, is the way he put it. They will cut a deal like the Green New Deal. Our job is to make sure that the deal that gets cut by the politicians is the best as far as the needs of the planet and the environment go. So I thought that was interesting. But let's, formatting again. Let's talk about the Green New Deal. The New Deal itself. So from a politics and policy standpoint, the invocation of the New Deal in the Green New Deal is brilliant. The New Deal was a period of progressive legislating. It was a jobs program. And typically, that's the challenge that environmentalists face. When we talk about the environment, the counterclaim is always, well, what about jobs? What about the effect on the economy? So the invocation of the New Deal, the FDR New Deal, I think is really helpful in terms of thinking about how we can address economic issues and at the same time respond to that typical challenge that's often used to frustrate environmentalism. As I said, the Green New Deal has two parts. The first is decarbonization, and the second is an economic policy to address those who will be negatively affected, economically affected by decarbonization. This will, in the words of Naomi Klein, make the Green New Deal recession-proof. Often what happens in environmental policy is we go some way toward enacting change, and then the moment there's an economic downturn, we pull back. Well, in the case of the Green New Deal, as in the case of the original New Deal, there will be a push to continue on, to move forward, because the economic advantages of the Green New Deal will justify the environmental policies themselves. And you guys are probably familiar with this, but it's pretty well established that the green economy generates economic growth and jobs. For example, in the U.S. Energy and Employment Report of 2018, jobs in wind, solar energy efficiency, and other clean energy sectors outnumbered fossil fuel jobs by a rate of 3-to-1. More recently, the University of Massachusetts at Amherst did a study of a Green New Deal style program in the state of Colorado and found out that if something like the Green New Deal were implemented, more jobs would be gained than would be lost. And there are more studies. If you want to Google U.S. Blue-Green Alliance, there's all kinds of data that suggest that if we implement something like the Green New Deal, the economic advantages will be significant. But as I said, the main thing I want to emphasize before I hand it over is that the Green New Deal tells a story that is inspiring. And I want to connect that back to the original New Deal. Stefan Zweig was perhaps the most well-known novelist of the time. And we have to remember that just as we face a crisis now, the crisis that the United States faced in the 1930s, and in fact, the crisis that the world faced in the 1930s was as great or greater. Literally, the question of liberal democracy was at stake. Could there be a program, a political philosophy that could defeat, on the one hand, fascism, and on the other hand, Bolshevism? And what Zweig said, writing in the 1930s, was, quote, "Our generation grew up in the ardent, inflexible faith in the mission of Europe. Though Europe has now proved so shamefully false to its most sacred mission, has destroyed itself in wanton self-laceration, though individual countries have made of moral irresponsibility a doctrine and of brutality a creed, we shall not be false to our faith. We shall place our trust in the youth of younger countries, America above all. It is for them to save the freedom of the mind, the humanity of the heart for the world." And he's thinking there of the New Deal in the 1930s as he sees all around him in Europe a descent into fascism on the one hand and Bolshevism on the other. For Zweig, the last best hope for liberal democracy itself was the New Deal. It may be the case that these guys invented liberal democracy and implemented it. Locke and Montesquieu, Adam Smith, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Thomas Jefferson, Madison, Frederick Douglass, the women of Seneca Falls, John Stuart Mill, Abraham Lincoln. They may have invented the idea of liberal democracy, but it's the New Deal that saved it. And that's kind of the thesis of Ira Katznelson's Fear Itself. This is from Katznelson, quote, "It is inconceivable that liberal democracy today would enjoy legitimacy and prestige without the actions taken by the long Roosevelt administration that effectively responded to the era's naysayers, who claimed that liberal democracies were too pusillanimous to challenge the treacherous dictatorships, too effete to mobilize their citizens, and too enthralled with free markets to manage a modern economy successfully," unquote. So I evoke this to give a sense of how something like the New Deal is up to the challenge that we face today, or we need something like that if we hope to confront the challenge that we face today in climate change. That's a piece of public art which was part of the New Deal, part of the New Deal programs under the FDR New Deal. I'll just finish by saying that there are these continuities with the New Deal in the Green New Deal. There are also some differences that we want to consider. First of all, and you may be familiar with some of this scholarship, one of the criticisms of the New Deal is that it excluded black workers and Hispanic workers, that it benefited white workers primarily. And it is true that in particular, agricultural workers were excluded who tended to be disproportionately Hispanic from the New Deal programs, and household workers were excluded who tended to be disproportionately African American. So one of the things that the Green New Deal needs to address is the problem of inclusion, or the question of inclusion, and that is explicitly part of the Green New Deal program. But the other thing is, FDR's New Deal didn't just save industrial capitalism. It turbocharged it. And so the Green New Deal isn't just a response to the deficiencies of FDR's New Deal. It's, maybe more importantly, a response to its successes. FDR's programs sent industrial capitalism into overdrive by leaving monopolistic corporations intact, building the foundation of the interstate highway system, expanding car-dependent suburban housing, incentivizing consumption, expanding air travel, accelerating mechanized extraction, and ramping up resource-intensive manufacturing. So even though the New Deal was one of the great successes in the history of the American Republic, it's the very success of the original New Deal that compels us now to pursue a new Green New Deal. Thank you very much.
Should we give you a black screen? Or that's a nice piece of work to be talking.
Yeah, it really is. Okay, hello. Hope everyone can hear me okay. So first, I'd just like to thank Sustainable Claremont for this great opportunity, and as well as the other people who are about to speak, and Professor Neidleman for the very illuminating introduction. So as was said before, my name is Ben Reicher, and I'm a sophomore here at Pomona College. And while I don't have this fascinating presentation that Professor Neidleman has here, but I wanted to come here to talk about my work with the Claremont College's hub of the Sunrise Movement. I wanted to talk about what we're doing, what we stand for, and how we're working to bring about a Green New Deal in our community. So the Sunrise Movement is a nationwide youth-led movement that calls for a national mobilization to decarbonize the U.S. economy and bring millions of good jobs to American workers. The Sunrise Movement consists of what are called hubs, which are regional groups of activists throughout the country. Each hub is legally independent, and the group has a mostly decentralized structure. And to me, I feel that that reflects our belief that the best people to solve the problems of a community are the people in that community itself. We strongly emphasize building ties with local communities, and thinking about how a policy can benefit each community in and of itself. And we feel that this is that by making sure that the voice of each community is recognized, we can make sure that the inequities and deficiencies that the original New Deal produced, despite the tremendous progress it made, aren't replicated a second time. So going back a little, I just wanted to talk about the work we're doing. So we're a relatively new hub, but I'm thrilled to say that we've made tremendous progress just since the start of the year, which I really couldn't have expected, I think. So last September, we had over 100 students from the Claremont colleges go down to LA to attend the Youth Climate Strike, the largest climate strike in history. Students walked out of school all around the world to call on our leaders to act on climate change. So I think as inspiring as that was to see just how many people care about this, and not just students, I might add. There were teachers, parents, people from all walks of life there as well. But I think for me the most important thing that we are doing as our own hub, and admittedly perhaps I can't talk as much about our national movement, but I feel that our hub is doing very important work right here, and I think it's important not because of the impact we can make on our own, because even if we decarbonize here, how much will it do? I think it's important because we're setting an example for what needs to happen everywhere if the Green New Deal transition is to be successful. I think as Professor Neidleman said, liberal democracy has to be renewed and strengthened with each generation. There has to be an effort made everywhere to preserve the gains that have been won by liberal democracy and build on those gains. And I think that is what our hub espouses. So we are. Right now, we are pursuing efforts to encourage the different 5C schools to take their sustainability efforts more seriously. Currently, we are trying to organize a town hall with representatives of, the presidents of each of the 5C schools to talk about their different policies. So as the policy coordinator, my job is to research what those policies are, and so this will allow us to know what questions to ask, to compile information that we can give out to attendees, and we hope this will allow us to eventually have a seat at the table if and when new and stronger policies are drafted and implemented. So in particular, we're looking at carbon neutrality commitments, which the different schools have varying levels of. For example, Pomona College has pledged to be carbon neutral by 2030. So so we are just excuse me. So right now we're trying to compile all the information and organize the town hall so that we can have the best response to what they say and be in the best position to influence policy going forward. Okay, so that's what we're doing right now, and I'm really glad to be able to share this all with you, and I'm really glad to turn it over to our next two speakers, who I feel also really espouse the way that local communities can be mobilized to achieve the Green New Deal transition that we all aspire to. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Daisy.
Hello, I want to start off also by thanking Sustainable Claremont for having us here today and for opening up the space for a labor perspective to join the conversation. So my name is Daisy Lopez. I'm a community organizer with the Warehouse Worker Resource Center. We are a local nonprofit based in the city of Ontario, but we do work all throughout Southern California, and we push for policies statewide in order to increase protections for workers. And although we believe that workers from all industries deserve access to good paying, safe jobs, particularly we focus on workers in the logistics industry. given the importance of that industry in our region. The Inland Empire is home to the largest logistics population in the nation. The Inland Empire moves $500 billion worth of goods annually. 43% of the nation's goods are moved through the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach, and a large portion of those goods are transported, distributed, and stored in the inland region. We have seen that the standards of this industry have eroded over the last 3 decades, and now a large portion of workers deal with different grievances like wage theft, discrimination, retaliation, unstable work due to the high use of staffing agencies by this industry. And a lot of these standards are set by large corporations, right? Some of the big names that you hear very often, like Walmart and Amazon and Kohl's, basically big name retailers. And so we focus on popular education and advocacy and direct action in order to support workers, for them to fight for better working conditions. And while we don't necessarily have a clear take on the Green New Deal proposals, since it is, like Professor Neidleman mentioned, more of like a ideological, right, like proposal. We do see that this region does need to see changes in the way that goods are moved due to the increasingly threatening global climate crisis. The logistics industry is highly responsible for the climate change due to the high use of diesel trucks and airplanes, rail yards, air cargo ships that are used to move these goods. And we see that oftentimes frontline communities of color, are the ones who are mostly impacted by the climate crisis due to their proximity of these 500,000 plus square foot warehouses that are every day more closer to homes and schools due to rezoning. So we do understand the need for a just transition to a green economy. And I guess the question that we pose is, how is this going to be a just transition for workers? Workers that from our communities that we work with, that we support, are oftentimes already, they oftentimes don't have the same access to good paying jobs, especially in an industry like this, right? The use of staffing agencies and these companies like Amazon place ridiculous quotas on their workers, and they create competition between workers in order to create division so that there is no cohesive like worker power and organizing power. So we understand the need for a just transition. And some of the things that we're doing on a more local perspective is that last year we formed a coalition called the Inland Coalition for Sustainable Goods Movement. So we're part of that coalition along with Sierra Club, the Center for Community Action and Environmental Justice, Inland Coalition for Immigrant Justice, the Inland Empire Labor Council, and others, in order to address the challenges that our communities face and take an intersectional approach, because at the end of the day, workers deal with these grievances in the workplace, but they also have to go home and breathe some of the worst air in the nation. Being residents from the IE, we do have some of the worst air in the nation. Just this last summer, we had 87 bad ozone days that surpass federal ozone levels, and so that some of the these organizations joined together last year in order to start addressing how we can begin to set a new standard for the industry and more accountable industry on developers and also our politicians that oftentimes allow these warehouses to come in because they propose jobs, but they're not jobs that provide a living wage, jobs that just, oftentimes our workers are working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. And so specifically with that coalition, right now we're focusing on the San Bernardino Airport expansion. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but last October, the San Bernardino International Airport Authority approved of the environmental impact review of this logistics center. It's going to be a 685,000 square foot logistics center at the San Bernardino Airport, which before was a former Norton Air Force Base. So it's still public property, and we see that as a good opportunity to leverage. So what we're fighting for is a community benefits agreement, and that has been achieved like at LAX or the Oakland airport. And what we're demanding, well, primarily what residents of San Bernardino are demanding are mitigations in order to tackle on the increasing challenges that will be brought on by this logistics center, because it's not just a normal logistics center that's going to see an increase in truck traffic, but it's also going to be an air cargo logistics center specifically. So right now, currently, there's only 5 flights a week out of this airport, and by the time this project is fully developed, by 2024, there's going to be 26 additional flights per day. So you can only imagine, like, we're already that community is already breathing some of the worst air, how that is just going to exacerbate those conditions. And so we're working with community in order to engage with them and see what their needs are. Like he mentioned, like Ben mentioned, we believe that communities they should be involved in conversations as to what their needs are. And so some of the things that we've been able to come up with together for this community benefits is mitigations like air filters in schools and homes nearby. Also to have a solid plan for electrification and zero emissions that's enforceable, but also things like good jobs, and by good jobs, we mean more than just a living wage, right? We mean access to training for these jobs. If they're gonna be air cargo jobs, will our community have access to these jobs? A job facility or a job training center, that they're full-time jobs and not part-time through temp agencies, and also other community benefits like a teen center where teens can hang out after school and different things like that, more funding for public schools near the area, because these corporations like Amazon, they come into neighborhoods and don't really benefit. It doesn't really benefit the community. They don't contribute as much as they should be. I think that an important part of the discussion towards a just economy, a green economy, is naming these corporations as responsible players in climate crisis. And so that's a little bit of what we're doing on the local level. We want to ensure that in these conversations that we're including the local perspective of workers, and ensuring that there is a just transition for workers, and we don't have an answer, a clear answer to that, but we're trying to tackle it in a local perspective, a local level, in order to change the standards of the industry, and hopefully from San Bernardino we can expand to the IE, and then we're also part of this, it's called CASE, the California Alliance for Secure Employment. We're part of that coalition as well, and that's tackling how to get rid of insecure employment, how we can increase stable jobs, and we're working on with workers all over the state right now, meeting with them to come up with a worker bill of rights that we want to hopefully push as policy in the coming years. And we would like to invite all of you. We're having a Cyber Monday action as part of the San Bernardino Airport Communities Coalition. It's going to be on Cyber Monday, December 2nd. We will be having a community rally around 5 p.m. We're still finalizing some of the details, but it's going to be in San Bernardino at one of the Amazon facilities. And if you'd like to sign up to receive more information on that, please feel free. Thank you.
Thank you, Daisy. Boy, that really set you up, Devon. I think a number of things that Ben and Daisy have mentioned, and really tough problems. But I think Devon is writing an example of how we might really get moving on this in a coherent way.
Thank you, Dick. Professor Neidleman said Bill McKibben suggested that we ignore the climate deniers. I think he would also agree with a slight twist on that, and that would be that I know that he would agree with Greta Thunberg in that saying we are all climate deniers and have been, even though all of us in this room have been trying to take leadership positions over the last couple decades, and some a lot longer than that. One of the other things in the incredibly visionary and ambitious and aspirational goals of the Green New Deal is that there's a date attached at 2030. And that puts things into stark relief, in my opinion, and it forces us to think in a different way. I remember when I wanted to grow my company, we set a goal of growing the company 10 times in 10 years. And we put a stake in the ground, we put numbers next to that, and we put a date that would be accomplished by. We had to do quarterly strategic planning meetings to set very strong, specific strategic goals that were quantified and that were assigned to people in terms of tasks to get accomplished. Those annual strategic goals were turned into quarterly goals, which were turned into monthly goals, which were turned into weekly one-on-one goals with management. We achieved our 10-year goal in 7 years because just having a vision sometimes allows us to strategically connect dots that we didn't even know needed to be connected. But there was a sense of urgency, and I know we all feel that in this room today. 15 years ago, when I first started trying to take on some kind of a leadership role in sustainability, the goal at that point was teaching vocabulary and concepts and educating people. And what does LEED mean, and what is a rapidly renewable resource, and what do we mean by energy efficiency anyway? And these days, the good news is that there are millions and millions and millions of people who are educated on the vocabulary. We know the concepts, we know what needs to be done, and there is a visceral understanding in the populace that what we are doing in terms of resource management is absolutely unsustainable and dangerous. We have that going for us now, and we did not have that going for us 15 years ago. So 2030 goals begs the question for us of how are we going to be comprehensive in our leadership of accomplishing those goals. I would like to show you one little thing that one little company and 2 little communities in the country are working on to try and accomplish those goals. That's the cities of Claremont and Pomona. And what we are doing is we are going to open the world's first nonprofit solar panel assembly factory. We're going to do this not just as a solar panel or technology play. We're going to try and address as many different aspects of our entire society that seem to be broken. Bill McKibben also said that solar panels are not just a Hogwarts-like magic, but they redress the balance of power. Also, Professor Neidleman mentioned that the biggest obstacle is fossil fuels and the power and the money that they represent. So we need to start at the bottom, and just like Bill McKibben also said, we need to show with grassroots movements that this is possible so that we can actually change the power because the people wish it to be that way. So in 5 minutes, I'm going to share 5 years of work, and then we can hopefully have a discussion about where to go from here. This solar panel assembly factory is an attempt to pull together as many different new solutions as possible into a new synergistic program that will have more leverage than parallel pathing any one of these things at one time. The first thing we're going to do is massively reduce greenhouse gases. That's number 1 goal. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to bring back middle-class manufacturing jobs, because that addresses our systemic reliance on venture capital and other countries to monetize the inventions that we're creating here and around the world in order to address these problems. This has created untold misery in the United States with a growing economic income gap that is now absolutely unsustainable and having huge swaths of our populations now living under bridges. We're going to stimulate local economies. What do we mean by that? We mean that it's not just enough to assume that big business is going to save us. It's not enough to assume that we need to have a multinational corporation come in and figure out a way to monetize these issues. We have to rethink our relationship to capital. And we have to rethink our relationship to our own local commons, our own local citizenry, and think first about how we're going to regenerate the way we relate to each other economically on a day-to-day basis. I can't tell you the number of people I've talked to in the last 5 years that have automatically said, oh, this sounds like a great idea. Why don't you sell this for $50 million? They can make these panels in China and we're done. It has left our imagination that we can do this ourselves. and that we even should do this ourselves. So we're going to recapture that possibility and address the economics of our cities, our local inner cities from the ground up, as well as creating solar panels. Number 4, we're going to do what we can to halt the explosion of environmental injustice. We have a city right next to us, Pomona, that ranks the highest percentile in the entire state of California on what's known as the Cal Enviro screen, 3.0. It's the highest, one of the highest negatively environmentally impacted areas in our state. There are many of them, but one is right next door. 24% of the children in Pomona are growing up under the poverty line. We cannot sustain this as a society. This is not a sustainable economic or environmental picture. We cannot allow this to continue. So, we're going to try and dream big and address all of these things together. How are we going to do this? We have several strategic advantages. Number 1, we're going to deploy the most advanced solar panel in the world. How can we do that? Because the actual inventor of this technology also believes in all of these things we're talking about, and in fact invented this particular technology to leverage these other economic and social benefits, and chose this particular way, this particular technology to be able to maximally affect these other aspects. So he's modeling at the very beginning of the project the holistic thinking that we are all involved in trying to accomplish here. Number 2, we're going to combine that incredible technology in a nonprofit business model and roll that out so that we can actually compete with China. As you know, China subsidizes their strategic initiative, which is solar. They got on board with this many, many years ago. And so now, as a nonprofit, we can also, as a community, subsidize lowering the cost of panels to compete with China. We've done all the economic analysis through Harvey Mudd, and we know that this is possible. Number 3, the new localism. What do we mean by this? In his talk, what's it called? The address to the city, the State of the City address by the mayor of Pomona, Mayor Sandoval, mentioned a book called The New Localism that I went out and had my whole staff read. The New Localism is a movement in the United States to rethink the way that local economies are relating to the world economy. In the last 40 years, we have given up local economies in favor of world economies. We now know that we need to take back control and have a new localism in the way that we understand how we bring businesses to our community, how we encourage them, and how we get them to work together so that we can hire local people to do local things and create a new economic reality. Number 4 is we're going to address environmental justice and poverty first. Okay, so this is not just a moral imperative. This is a way that economically we start at the bottom and grow up. Okay, so follow me on this. A low-income household in Pomona spending about $80 a month on energy. If we put solar panels on 6,000 of those low-income households, which is actually goal number 1 of the first factory, to help 6,000 of the lowest income households, 6,000 low-income households on an annual basis send $6.5 million a year to the utilities, every year. A low-income household who does not have to pay that energy bill will tend to spend that $80 a month or $6.5 million a year in aggregate. They will spend that extra disposable personal income immediately and locally at a 7 times higher multiplier rate than a high-income household, right? Because they've never satisfied their essential spending needs. They will spend it on food and clothing and medicine and gasoline and school supplies, right? That is the fastest way we can stimulate a local economy. Not to mention the jobs that we will be creating inside that local community on a regenerative basis. Okay, so that's the business model. This is what we're after here. Prototype factory number 1. Just phase 1 alone, at 6,000 households with energy supplied by new solar panels, will mitigate 26,700 metric tons of carbon per year. That's the equivalent of taking an automobile and driving around the earth 2,500 times each year. Okay? It's a big number. Jobs. We will create 700 direct and indirect jobs in the city of Pomona and Claremont. This has an economic expansion potential of 7 times every dollar spent on locally grown power. And in 15 years, it will expand the economy to $147 million beyond the $20 million that we will spend to put in. That's a 7 times expansion in the local economy in 15 years. We will address 6,000 low to middle income households, pouring back $6.5 million a year into the local economy. And by the way, that will gin up local city sales tax and enough sales tax to the state to pay back the $25 million investment needed to accomplish phase 1 in under 5 years to the state in sales tax. And double the money to from the state in under 10 years. This is our goal by the end of this next year. This is our goal here. Where's my pointer? Yeah. This is our goal by the end of 3 years. We want to have 10 factories. All right? So the numbers start getting very, very exciting and staggering. And this is where we start approaching the idea of scale that we're going to need to address a Green New Deal. That turns into 260,000 metric tons of CO2 per year. That turns into 7,600 direct and indirect jobs in 10 local communities. These numbers start making a real difference. This turns into $1 billion number, a $1 trillion number, right? About $1 billion number, sorry, in 15 years. And we can address in 10 years, at the end of 3 years, we'll be in the process of addressing 60,000 low to middle income households, addressing our environmental justice needs. So the message really is simple. It's time for us all to think about what the timeline looks like in 10 years. Look around and find a project that you can help provide some leadership on, and help that project think strategically about how fast you can help them grow and scale to address some of these issues that the Green New Deal is aspirationally targeting. This will only happen at the grassroots level. We know that. So from our perspective, we're going to need a lot of help. So we are taking names and numbers right now in terms of anybody who wants to help us from a volunteer perspective going forward. We have lots and lots of leadership positions required and necessary. We have dozens of interns from the colleges all around the region helping us, and we need a lot more help like so many other organizations do. So I guess my message is here on the ground that I think the time is right. We're in the right state. The legislative environment is extremely rich. There's money. $2 billion out of cap and trade over the next 10 years has been earmarked specifically in our state of California to be spent on communities like Pomona that are part of the disadvantaged communities on the CalEnviro screen. So it's up to us to see what we can do to bring some of that $2 billion to our region and start expanding our efforts on this aspirational Green New Deal. So with that, I think we wanted to get into some conversation and how we can move forward.
Thank you, Devon. I get excited every time I hear it. So if we can get all four speakers and maybe seat yourselves, and we'll turn off the...
The entire world economy seems to be based on the extraction and use or destruction of various kinds of natural resources. Some of them plant, some of them mineral, etc. That's going to be hard to turn around. That's a bigger lift than FDR faced in the 1930s. How does the Green New Deal address that?
Just real quickly, you're absolutely right. We've had what's called an extractive mentality and an extractive capitalism. One example of that, of course, is that coal mines are continuing to close. No matter, they were opened, obviously, and exploited for decades, as well as fracking and oil drilling. But the hope right now and the economics, because of technology, has allowed us now to be starting to think about having those things close, and they are closing in and of themselves. And one of our goals is to be able to supplant where we're in conversation right now with a cooperative utility in New Mexico and an organization in West Virginia, both coal mining areas. And so we see the opportunity to supplant the closed coal mine with a new solar panel assembly factory so that we can actually retrain and retool and use another kind of extractive resource, which is capturing photons that are landing on the Earth every day that we're just kind of now learning how to mine ourselves. So in a kind of a cleaner, greener way.
Well, of course you're right, but a lot depends on the resources that we extract. And as Devon just pointed out, energy, wind, sustainable energy is an alternative. And we know that at some point we are going to transition to these other sources of energy, even if we're just driven by the economics, because they're becoming more economically attractive. The question is, do we get there in time? And if we wait for the market to solve the problem, we don't get there in time. We miss our deadlines. That's why it's so important that we have mass mobilization, that it be intersectional, that it involve all of these sectors of society. And I think I see what you did, Dick. You have someone from labor, you have someone from business, you have someone from representing civic engagement. I'm not sure why I'm here, but I understand why the other three are. And that's the only way we make the transition that we're going to make either way in time to save ourselves.
Thank you. So I'll try to build off of what was said before. So I think when we talk about extractive industry, what we have to say is, extraction of what? And what we really mean is this method of what we're really talking about is this economy that takes extraction to the extent that it has severe negative impacts on the environment, on people's lives and livelihoods, and ultimately on our ability to continue living this way. It's when we say it's unsustainable, we mean it's unsustainable as as a source of future prosperity to the extent that that has happened. But I think from an activist perspective, what we have to think about is that, there's nothing inherent about this. The extractive industry, it started out somehow, and if it's not working for us, we can change it. And we can change it because we are capable of realizing that there is an alternative that is better for us, that doesn't cause this mass disruption to the lives and health of communities, that doesn't hurt our environment, and that ultimately might be more beneficial for the economy as a whole. I don't know if anyone here, has anyone read Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker? So there's just this one quote that I think is very telling here. He says, "The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. It ended because we found something better." And I think, we're rational beings. We always retain the ability to do that. Okay, thank you.
I don't know that I have much more to add to that, but one of the things that I think that we have to discuss is how, from our perspective, the logistics industry is fundamentally unsustainable, given the amount of consumption. So when we start to discuss a Green New Deal and extraction of materials, I think that's one of the things that we can analyze.
Yes. Fascinating, diverse panel. Congratulations of putting it together. I'm interested in the issue of technology, right? Not only from a philosophical point of view and what it helps or doesn't help in this Green New Deal, but also I heard Mr. Hartman, who spoke about his project, or the project of bringing these solar panels, and you said that you can do that because the inventor of these new solar panels shares the goals of creating a non-profit, environmentally sound kind of business model. And I was wondering, when you spoke about that, so there's a kind of technology, new technology in solar panels that has been discovered by this person that works with you, and that's why you can do that? And if you can do that as a kind of business model that's not profit, shouldn't that be extended to some other, if there's a new technology that's better than the other solar panels, should that be proprietary to you, or should it be expanded to other areas? So the issue is technology. How I don't know much about your project, so I'm asking a question. Maybe you'll be able to clarify that for me. Why do you have this person who invented this revolutionary kind of technology? And if it is so good, should you share it with everybody?
Mm-hmm. Yes, the short answer is that is the precise business model. It's not going to be sold to be captured and profitized by multinational corporation anywhere in the world. It's going to be, we're going to model how every community in the country can start their own mini solar factory. It's a true David or Goliath type of story. Our business model right now in the world is that most people think that in terms of making solar panels, really in the last 5 years, I've never really met anyone who who believes that it's not possible to create a solar panel outside of $1 billion lights out factory in China. That's the model in people's minds. And so right now we're spending in the United States billions of dollars every year out of our little community, sending it to Asia to purchase the technology outside of our country. So the first major cost of any solar system leaves not only our local economy, but our state economy and the country's economy already. So that particular model has not worked very well because solar companies are only selling solar systems to the top 20% of household income. Also, likewise, our entire federal tax credit system is lined up to incentivize the purchase of solar only for the wealthiest of households, because you do not get a federal tax credit unless you have a tax appetite. So 30% of any solar system that's currently purchased in the country today can come back to a high-income household owner, but never to anyone on the lowest 60 percentile of household incomes. So we have been inadvertently subsidizing the rich to buy expensive solar panels made in foreign countries. Our goal is to create a prototype that can be opened by any nonprofit in any city in the country, and to have the license available to be deployed in any nonprofit in any city and set up so that what we're trying to do right now is have this replicable so that CHIRP can train as many different cities as possible to be able to do this until it outstrips even our ability. And we're hoping that there will be many other organizations like CHIRP who join us so that this can become viral in the United States. And we believe that this is a scalable model for many other industries as well. As we attract other businesses, as we grow in the number of panels that we create, we'll also be able to have other businesses relocate locally in terms of wiring harnesses and chip manufacturers and circuit board makers, those kinds of industries. So that's kind of roughly the model that we're hoping that will actually create a kind of a viral scalability.
I know this has been on the drawing board and you're finally getting funding and it's starting to happen. How long has it taken to get to this point?
Kent Kernahan, the inventor, woke up one day in 2010 in the bottom of the recession and got up that afternoon and wrote a monograph called The Great Recession, My Fault. There are very few people in the United States who have more than 20 to 25 patents to their name. Those people are called prolific inventors. He has now 74 patents to his name. And he realized that the inventor class in the United States have a huge lever that they can pull over where their inventions get monetized. An inventor has control, unless he's working or she is working for a multinational corporation, has control over how and when that invention gets monetized. And so the inventors in the United States, if they got together and had a deeper understanding of their control over the possible local economics of our country, then they could change a tremendous amount of things right there. So the idea started in 2010. He went to a design charrette at Rocky Mountain Institute in Colorado with Amory Lovins, discovered an Achilles heel of hotspots in solar panels technology, went out and invented a way to obviate and eradicate that problem, since it's the problem that's been in solar panels since 1941, since the invention of the silicon solar cell, and applied for a patent and received that patent in 2015, and that was the year that I met him. So we've been working on this for 5 years. Yeah, yeah.
Hi, thank you all. I'd like to go back to what we started with Professor Neidleman and ask that he and others speak to the whole idea of us as storytellers, of politics as you know, our just this basic part of who we are as responding to stories, whether it's Mr. Trump's or Greta's or yours. And so, because our social situation is not sustainable either. Our political situation is not sustainable in terms of the way we're seeing and treating each other and the way we're conceptualizing what the issues are. And I know tomorrow and the next day, Marianne Williamson's going to be speaking at Scripps in Pomona. I don't want her to be president, but I love what she has to say. And so how do we do all of the things that you're doing and we're doing in a way that's intersectional with a loving heart, that's looking at all beings and realizing that includes our neighbor and our uncle that we can't stand. And so that we recapture that deep love that has motivated all of us to be people who care about sustainability and about the well-being of the planet and of each other. So can you speak to the whole issue of how do we conceptualize this as a story? How do we share it as a story? How do we create the story together for the future?
No, but I could maybe say something about how difficult that is and why I think it's particularly difficult. And I would say it's probably best captured by this idea of global citizenship, which is powerful to some. I mean, as Dick said, most of my work has been on Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and he was very skeptical of cosmopolitanism. And he actually thought that was a purview of a few intellectuals, and that most people would be motivated by a concern for compatriots, for smaller communities. And this is pessimistic, but I wonder if human beings are not engineered to deal with a problem of this kind. And if that's the case, then we really have to come up with a compelling story to counteract everything else that our evolution has led us up to in this moment. And I guess just kind of building on the question, and a question I had from my fellow panelists is, how do you respond, especially you two, how do we respond to people who feel like they can't afford to think about communities beyond the immediate community or needs beyond their immediate needs? That this concern for a decade or 2 decades out is a kind of a luxury of the privileged. And the movement, of course, has to be an intersectional one, and it has to speak to people who are most affected immediately by public policy. And it's commonplace now to say that the people who are most harmed by climate change are the very people who had the least to do with causing it. So I guess I would kind of turn to you two, and how do we tell a story that has a long time horizon, that includes a community of global citizens, when so many of our needs are immediate, and we might feel like we don't have the luxury to think about those things as we build political narratives and organize our political identities?
Okay, I'll try to respond to this as best as I can. So, again, speaking from the perspective of an activist, I would say that from the experiences I have had, I feel it's equally important. I would say it's as important as telling stories. I would say equally important to telling stories, it's important to listen. And it's important to not just tell your story or other people's stories to others, but to make them listen. Perhaps I'm not getting the distinction across, but what I'm trying to say is that our goal here isn't just to, tell our story because we might be shouting into the void for all we know. It's to give people the chance to connect to it, and to to feel a personal connection to the people whose stories we are telling. And the fact is, climate change is no longer something that's going to happen in 10 or 20 years. For so many people, it's happening already, and I think their stories are a very potent tool, perhaps the most potent tool in mobilizing people to act. The personal connection that people can feel, if they feel that this could be me or my family, that is what motivates them to act. So, just from my own personal experiences, what first made me care about environmentalism was, in fact, the Aliso Canyon gas leak. I don't know how many people here have heard about it, but it actually happened. Yeah, it actually happened about a mile from my high school. So our school got air quality testing. I knew people who had to relocate, some of whom ended up leaving permanently. So luckily we tested safe. But I know people who had health effects, many of whom are still feeling them. And that's really what led me to see just how dangerous the fossil fuel industry can be, or not simply dangerous, but how it accrues lasting harm that just isn't going to go away. So so I think for me, if we can make people relate personally to the stories we're telling, that almost it lessens the effect of the local versus global divide. I think I hope I'm not being too idealistic here, but I really think that if we can tell these stories in a way that people can relate to them personally, it's less about who we tell them about and more about how we tell them, I think is what I'm saying. And so I think that is the best way to mobilize people. It's through it's by helping them listen to the stories that we tell. Thank you. Hope that wasn't too long.
For us, some of what we try to do through our popular education programs and just organizing in general is we try to challenge these dominating narratives like scarcity, and that there isn't enough good jobs to go around, or this idea of individualism, which hopefully it's safe to say that this country focuses more on individualism instead of collective power and how we can help each other. So that's what we try to do in our organizing, challenge these ideas, whilst recognizing that for a lot of our community and workers, there is real challenges. Like he mentioned, that some of them are living paycheck to paycheck, and how is it that we can encourage them to engage in working towards change.
Okay, I heard you guys talking about global citizenship. My thing is, will the new Green Deal, would it leave African and the third world, the global south, out of the deal? Because what I tend to see through all the deals, the people that get the less out of all of the deals are the people from the global south. We're the one that have to deal with the pollution. We're the one, the ocean rising. So what I'm trying to say, would this new deal, Green New Deal, would it benefit the global south? And how would it benefit the global south?
The only thing I would say is just to agree that as I said, the victims of climate change are precisely not the people who are responsible for climate change. So it makes sense to me that we would want to go to the source of the problem, which is the developed world, and stop the effects of climate change, which are being borne disproportionately by the developing world, though not exclusively at all. What's in it for the rest of the world? The reason I tried to emphasize the New Deal and the model it set for the rest of the world was not because the nature of the problem was the same, of course, very different, facing a fascist threat or a Bolshevik threat versus a global climate catastrophe. It's because at that time, the United States was able to provide a model that could be emulated internationally. Now, we're currently suffering with some of the effects of that model, but it sets a precedent. And there's an opportunity now for the United States to set a model. We're not doing it, right? In fact, we're failing to do it. But the Green New Deal is an opportunity to actually do it. Set a model that could be emulated in other places and ideally, eventually, would spread everywhere and could benefit everyone.
I guess it's my turn. I have a question, first of all, about the energy situation, and then one that goes broader. Devon, do you see the possibility that your concept could be expanded by making an opportunity to capture power at times when it's not available for solar panels? I'm thinking particularly of the energy vault concept, where excess solar energy that's captured during the day is used to haul weighty concrete blocks to a considerable height, and then at night lower them and run a generator to regenerate the energy. Concept of this sort, which could enhance the concept that you come up with. My second thought is, okay, suppose we solve this problem of climate change in this fashion. It seems to me that we are faced with so many different other problems that I don't see such a clear solution to. For instance, our economy seems to be based on ever more expansion, and we're going to run out of resources. That seems inevitable. What do we do about that? The population of the Earth is increasing to the point where that becomes unsustainable. How do we address all of these problems in a conceptual way?
Well, I'll tackle the first one, the first question. And that is that as California is burning, and we're suffering billions of dollars of economic liability from fire, PG&E is faced with cutting off power to hundreds of thousands of people because the long-distance electrical lines bringing power from outside our communities are burning down the forests. And so when they cut the power to stop the billions of dollars of damage in fires, they're creating billions of dollars of damage in lost business opportunities and restaurants and life and health safety issues. So this is another kind of opportunity for restructuring the way that we think about where we make and how we use our energy. So you're exactly right to bring up the idea of storage. We're also on a worldwide race to find the best, most cost-effective storage solutions. We are, in fact, partnering with Energy Vault on a number of different projects to supply so that our panels can supply the energy during the day to raise the, to store the energy, the potential energy that can be reduced at night. This is where it starts getting very exciting because we're in conversation right now with the city of Pomona with an entire task force focused on trying to submit a $28 million grant to the state of California on something called the Transformational Climate Communities Grant. And we are now proposing that most of that grant be spent on helping us create enough energy for thousands of households and hundreds of businesses in Pomona in conjunction with energy. to be able to use that state money to set up local energy creation and storage so that we can completely obviate transmission of energy. Because it is true that a local photon is worth way more than a photon that comes from a distance. Not only in transmission losses, but now we see sparks and other sorts of problems. So we believe that right now, I mean, this is another one of the kind of the exciting things, is that everybody now understands that equation of local control, local business, creating local energy, storing it locally, and using it locally for resilience, as well as for everyday energy use. So I'm going to let the philosopher address the next question.
Yeah, see, I'm going to be clever here, but turn it around on you a little bit. The Green New Deal is precisely an attempt to address the problem that you articulate, which is that we have to solve multiple problems at the same time. And we're out of time now, so we have to address the problem of the climate. But the reason the Green New Deal also addresses things like the legacy of white supremacy and economic inequality is because AOC understands that we won't get anywhere unless we address those things at the same time. So yes, we face multiple problems, and that's why we need legislation that's up to the task of addressing all of those problems at the same time. It might sound impossible, but we don't have a choice. We're out of time. We have to do it. Now we're really out of time.
You know, I think we've reached the end of our rope here this evening, but if the speakers are willing to stay a little afterwards, I think it'd be really fun to have a one-on-one. I have a question for Daisy I've been wanting to ask, and I think I'll just ask her directly as soon as we stop. Let's give a big hand to our group of four. Thank you all. Thanks very much.